Good morning. I'm Chef Jason, CEC. Today, I'm here to do my video demonstration for my CCE, Certified Culinary Educator. Today, we're going to be making lobster bisque. And a couple of things that we're going to be making sure we cover today is, number one, the origin of that bisque, where it comes from. Number two, some of the key moments in time during the procedure that we want to make sure we take care of that bisque to make sure that we get the proper quality. And also, how do we tell whether we've achieved that measure, right? And third, once we have our finished product, how do we evaluate whether we have a proper bisque? Things that we do all the time, just me doing it instead of you. So a couple of things that we're going to check in with before we even get started, and that's myself. Clean uniform, clean apron, clean side towel, clean shoes, clean hat, clean shaven, clean nails, clean hands that have been washed for how many seconds? Yeah, the whole process, right? 20 seconds, right? We have our sanitizer adjusted to the appropriate strength, right? Along with the clean and fresh sanitation cloth. I'm going to keep that under the station so that it can be taken care of and used as necessary. So I have my mise en place here. We're going to get right into it. The first thing that we have to remember when we cook anything, like we do every day, is having everything in its place. It's much more efficient, as you'll see in this video today, if we start with everything we need and we don't have to stop and go around the kitchen to gather an extra ladle, or we don't have to go and grab that wooden spoon that we forgot. So doing your very best as a student to think critically of all those things. And like we said on Monday, it's easy to remember the ingredients. That's listed right there in your recipe. But your procedure and your recipe doesn't list all those tools. And that's where the experience comes in, thinking to yourself, what do I need and when? So what I like to do is I go through the procedure at step one, and I think to myself only about step one and ask, what am I going to need to do this job? And then I go to step two, step three, and so on, all the way to the finish line. If I make a mistake and forget something, I write it on the work plan that I have so that I can remember in that moment and also remember next time. Plus, it makes me accountable versus just saying, oh, I just have to go get something else. Count how many times you have to leave your station, and you'll be surprised at just by tracking it how much better you get at making sure that you get everything you need and stay put. So the first thing that we need to do is build an aromatic base. And what's the purpose of that? Just so you guys know, I'll be asking you questions. Why do we have to build an aromatic base? Well, first, let's make it easy. What is an aromatic base? Don't be worried about giving the wrong answer. I'll help adjust. All right, I can choose. Go ahead. Yeah, exactly. Aromatic base, aromas. How many of you have noticed that we've been building flavors every time we cook? What did we do yesterday when we made our gumbo? Did we just add everything all at once? No. As necessary, that's right. So I'm doing a quick small dice on the onions. When we cook things for a shorter amount of time, does that mean our aromatics should be larger or smaller? Why would they be smaller? Yeah, the smaller you cut it, the more readily you're going to extract flavor. And if you're going to cook something for a short amount of time, if you cut the item too large, you're not going to extract all the flavor. You're going to waste money. And if you cut it too small and cook something for a long time, that product can break down. I've small diced my onions. I've crushed a garlic clove by simply taking my knife and crushing it. The onions, are we more worried about yield, or are we worried about perfect cuts? Yeah. Are we going to strain this soup? So does it really matter if the cuts are perfect or not? Do they need to be the same size? Do they need to be 100% identical? It's a tough question, right? I'm going to tell you this. They need to be uniform in size, you're right. If we want even cooking, these onions and everything we cut here and everything we cut in any recipe needs to be the same size. If it's not cut the same size, it's not going to cook the same. However, when we're just trying to do a rough dice and we're going to strain that out anyways, it's not a display cut. This is not going to be demonstrated in the finished product. So my original question of yield becomes the most priority. We want to use that entire onion. We don't want to have any waste. We don't right here. Right? So as you guys already know, to perform a dice, first we need to cut our product into sticks. And yesterday a couple of us struggled in getting a dice out of celery. I saw a lot of us were just going right into it. But that's not a dice. A dice is a square shape, not a horseshoe shape, right? That's for good luck. We cut this first into batons, right? Does that look a little bit more familiar? Right? So we take our batons and we cut those. We cut our batons first, then we cut all of them at the same time. What a lot of young students like to do is they'll cut one baton, right? I'll cut this one. All right, now I'm going to dice it. Okay, now I got that one done. Now I'm going to cut this one. Good. Nice. Remember we talked about efficiency, proficiency, and speed? Does that look like it's efficient to you? No. Would taking all of these batons and cutting them at the same time be more efficient now that we have them into a baton shape? Let's see which one looks faster to you guys. I didn't even have to go that fast, so I'm not trying to go at lightning speed to say, well, I'm fast because I have more experience. I'm just showing by simply being more efficient, we can get the job done more quickly, right? I think that's all we'll need, just 4 ounces for celery. So what is the standard base for mirepoix? Does it look like we are achieving that here? Are we building a mirepoix? Is this a white mirepoix, being that we have carrots? No. What would a white mirepoix have instead of carrots? Parsnips, turnips, right? Not like that. Maybe both. Good. What's the other ingredient that goes into a white mirepoix? Yeah, mushrooms. Good. When would we use a white mirepoix instead of a basic one? What's the point? Why can't we just have a regular old mirepoix? Okay, so white foods having a white mirepoix, that makes sense. And you're right, that's correct. So would you agree that a lobster bisque probably originates in France? Right? We're using some French ingredients. We have some brandy here. We have a mirepoix here. Do you guys know who was the creator or when and where lobster bisque is said to have originated? During the days of Auguste Escoffier. You guys know who he is, right? He's the godfather of French cuisine. He's the gentleman that really quantified and classified those mother sauces that we were working on last week, right? And this was during the 17th century or so. You can find his recipe in Le Guide Culinaire, which is one of the most iconic cookbooks out that chefs have everywhere. So we have our mirepoix, right? Simple. We're going to add fennel, though. That's going to be our addition here. Why do you think we're adding fennel? There's a very deliberate reason, right? What do you think? Shellfish? Okay, all right. So what about that? A lighter aroma. What does fennel smell like? Do you guys like to pass it around? Tell me what you think. I've removed the core, or most of it, just the woody parts and the parts that's a little bit dirty. However, since we're going to strain this soup, I'm not too worried about if we have a little bit of it in it. I'd rather go for yield. What does it smell like, guys? I'm going to dice this the same way I dice an onion, having the stalk side face me, the root side face away, and go all the way near the root. Remember, leaving the root intact when we dice an onion. One second. Leaving the root attached allows it to hold its shape. Some of us yesterday when we were slicing our onions for French onion soup, and some of us when we were dicing onions are forgetting which one goes where. When we slice, the core disappears. It needs to be out first, otherwise those layers are going to stick. When we dice, we leave that core in place so that that product doesn't fall apart. Does that make sense? I see a lot of people confusing those two applications. But now, because this will be recorded, and you'll be able to watch this 1,000 times with your friends and family over Christmas, you'll never forget again once we get back from our break. So again, a small dice. What does it smell like, Jade? I think that sounds good to me. What do you guys think? Is Jade right? Anise, yeah, and anise and licorice are the same in terms of licorice candy being made from that. What's that? Yeah, meaty. Does it smell like, remember when we talked about flavors in terms of base notes, deep and heavy notes, middle notes, and light, refreshing notes? Which one does this strike your palate as, a fresh note or a low base note? Right. And do we want our food to have contrast in general, whether we're making a bisque or not? And as we get to this later on, our roasted shells, those have deep flavors, don't they? When we roast and develop flavor, we deepen that flavor, right? So we want to have contrast there, and that's why our mirepoix and other aromatics are going to help with that. You'll see that we have a few other ingredients later on to help create that contrast. We have one more aromatic that we're going to add. This is a leek, right? This leek has been cut in half. For those of you who may have forgotten, I'll go through how to clean it again. You cut it in half, the root attached, and we have to make sure we open these layers to clean out any residual dirt that could be in them. The leek grows in the ground. The part that's white is under the soil. That's why it stays white. There's no sunlight to develop the chlorophyll in that vegetable. The part that's underground stays white, and that's the part that's also more tender because it doesn't have to be resistant to wind and other adverse environmental conditions. Does that make sense? That's why we use the white part. The green part can be used, however, for aromatic base, but for this I want to do it nice, and I want to have a nice soup with the lobster. I'm going to use the best parts of the leek. Thinly sliced. Why are we cutting it thin again? Why can't I cut it big? What if I just threw this whole thing in here? We did that for a bouquet garni. Why shouldn't I do that for this? That's right. A bouquet garni for a stock that's going to simmer for 6 hours. Is this going to simmer for 6 hours? No way, right? So it's always not just thinking about what I'm doing. It's why am I doing it? Why is what matters, right? We're going to turn our heat on to lead ourselves, which I have preheating. I'm going to turn that up a little bit more because, like we were saying yesterday, there's a lot of work to get done in the kitchen, right? So the best way to get done is to lead the dance, right? You got to lead the dance. You got to know what the next step is. You don't want to get caught up not knowing what's next because that's when we lose time, right? You see it all the time. And it's okay to have to reflect on your recipes. It's okay to have to consult the timeline, but you want to lead that dance as best as possible so that as you get better, it becomes more natural. Things are more seamless. So imagine if I didn't have this preheated right now. What would we do? We would stand here and watch me for 3 minutes, wait for it to get heated. The same thing would be you in the kitchen, 3 minutes of your own time, right? Mise en place isn't just about having everything. It's about leading the procedure as well, right? Not having this underneath the station, not having this in the spare room and having to get it plugged in. We're going to start off by sweating in a little bit of olive oil. What's the difference between sweating and saute? Yeah, no color for sweating, right? In a saute, do we need color? That's right. Is it a saute if we don't have color? No. Will it ever be a saute? Yeah, and I'm looking at you guys, and that's what's kind of cool about doing these demos, and it's not to make you feel bad as students. Everybody has been there before, right? Everybody has been there before. It's just about making sure that we internalize those mistakes and don't make them again, right? I'm adding all of our aromatics. I'm going to turn that heat down just a little bit because I want to hear a little bit of noise, but I don't want to hear it hissing and sizzling. That sound like an angry snake is a sure indication that water is evaporating quickly out of that food, and after that water is gone, guess what's happening? It's going to brown. If you don't hear that sound, water is not evaporating quickly, and therefore it will not brown, right? What would happen if we let this cook for 3 minutes straight? Would it burn? With this sound, what do you think? What are your instincts telling you? Could I do other things right now? Could I stir this and then go do something else, or do I need to stand here for 25 minutes or 20 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever time it is, waiting for it? I like that. And even if it's not, right, and it is great when you can work in close proximity, it is. But even when it's not, you got to have that instinct to tell yourself, it's cooking in my mind, it's cooking in my heart. I can feel it cooking. I'm tracking it in my mind, right? And knowing that if we're cooking at the appropriate temperatures, those times take the same. If we're sweating for 5 minutes and we're sweating properly, That means that there's not going to develop any color if we're at the right temperature. That means I do not have to stand here and constantly stir, constantly stir. It does mean that I have to keep an eye on it, and when in doubt, okay, fine, I get it. You want to make sure that it's right? Fine. Also, sometimes as students, we want to stay with it because we want to see how it changes, right? Even today, sometimes when I'm roasting something, I'll just sit right in front of the oven with the light on as I watch it caramelize because I want to see that transformation. But when the job's got to get done, we have to be able to break away and get other things done. We can't stay married to the stove. I have the luxury of cooking one thing today. You guys don't. You have to stay focused. And in your jobs, you're probably cooking more than one thing at a time too, right? How many things are you cooking on a given moment at your job, Ro? One thing, two things? How? Cooking 3 or 4 things at a time, all the time, every day, right? I'm going to add a little bit of salt now, seasoning a little bit in the beginning. When we add salt, we pull a little bit of moisture out of that vegetable or out of that ingredient, whatever it is. That's going to actually help the vegetable sweat a little bit more efficiently. We want to pull the water out because we want to concentrate flavor. That's why we're sweating this. Is there anything stopping us from adding everything right now at this table into one pot? No. So when we ask ourselves, well, why aren't we? This is a lot more work, right? The reason is that we're trying to extract some flavor, get these flavors to combine, and also get rid of a little bit of this water so that we can help intensify the flavors, right? How does it smell? Like anything? That's one thing that I like about this soup. To be honest, it's one of the reasons that I chose it, is because these are very humble ingredients by themselves. Maybe the lobster stock, which we'll get to when we add it, but some shells, some vegetables, some liquid, a little bit of rice and tomato, and we're going to make something that people spend, what, $14 for? And that's what being a chef is all about, knowing how to add value through technique and skill. Once we've developed that nice aroma, which I believe that we have, right? How do we know when onions have been sweated properly? Isn't there that word that starts with the T that we keep seeing? It's a big word. Translucent. Translucent is just as hard to say as it is to spell, and it can be even harder to understand what translucent means. It means that it's starting to become see-through, right? You can't see through it like a glass window, but it's not quite as solid of a white as it was before. Does that make sense? We have our lobster shells. Remember the ones that we cleaned yesterday? What did we have to do when we cleaned our lobster shells? Remove the gills, right? And why do we remove them? Who cares? The color and the bitter flavor. You got it, right? And it's all about knowing what the right skills are and then doing them. Was there anybody stopping you when you own your own business to not take that step? No, but great chefs know the techniques, the things that they need to do to improve the quality of their food, and they do them every time. They don't skip it because they're tired. They don't skip it because they're busy. They find a way. These shells are very crushed. We roasted them and crushed the bejesus out of them. But why? Who cares? I see. So you're saying that by crushing these shells so vigorously, we're going to be more likely to extract a higher degree of flavor? I like that, and I agree, and I think you're right. How much does a lobster cost at the grocery store? I know we get better prices as we're chefs, but how much? Wow, that's a good price, maybe for a tail, right? I think we're probably looking at closer to $30 for a good one. Now, there's ones that grow over in Canada. They also call them chickens that are smaller, about a pound. Those ones usually go cheaper because they don't have as much meat in them. They're more bone than meat. However, a nice, good Maine lobster, you're probably looking at $30, maybe more, depending on how good or how big it is. We want to be able to get our money's worth, whether we're a chef or whether we're at home cooking for somebody for our anniversary or Valentine's Day. Or maybe you eat lobster on Friday night for fun. I don't know, but I know I'm not, right? We want to get everything we can out of it. So all we're doing is maximizing our respect for the ingredient by using every single bit of it. Remember when we made our lobster butter and we used the tamale and the coral, right? This is just another way, again, to respect that ingredient. And what's cool about respecting ingredients is that you make more money when you do it. Some places would throw this away. I don't want to make the soup. We don't got time. Just serve the lobster tail and let's just be done with it. We're not going to do that because we understand that if we want to be chefs, we have to be able to control time, like we said, in our work plans and timelines. And what's the other one? Control time and what? No, that's ServSafe. If we want to be a chef, we got to be able to control time. And what else do we have to be able to do? What's that? Make money doing it, right? Can you keep your business or keep your line cook job if wherever you're working isn't making money? No, you can't. How does that smell now? We're stirring it around, and we're also going to crush it even more, right? I was keeping it quiet because we're having a conversation, but now I'm going to get vicious. I'm seeing some brown bits at the bottom of the pan. Is that good or bad? You're like, uh-oh, don't ask me. What is the name of that? Fun, that's right. So what do you mean deglaze? I'm trying. So what else do I need to get that job done? What else can I use besides stock? Water. What else can I use besides that? No, fat will never work. It's got to be a water-based liquid, right? Sure. What's another one? You're probably going to drink some tonight. Oh, wine. There you go. We're going to deglaze with some white wine. Why not red wine? Yeah, it'd probably make an adverse color. What about matching intensities? Is red wine tend to be a bolder flavor, maybe even a little bit more bitter or tannic than a white wine? Do you think that that could perhaps overwhelm the lobster flavor? So we never want to lose sight that the lobster is the star of this show. It's not celery, it's not fennel, it's not carrots, it's not white wine. Maybe if you drink more wine than soup, but the star of this dish is the lobster. So we only want everything else to accentuate that, to accent the lead role. And that's one of the big principles in exquisite cooking too. It's chefs who understand not adding so much or of an ingredient or not adding too many ingredients so that you lose sight of who's the star of the show, right? You guys watch those Marvel superhero movies where they've got like 30 superheroes? You don't even know who's the real lead, right? That's okay for a superhero movie. It's not okay for food, right? We want to know what is the feature here, especially if it's an expensive ingredient like a lobster, right? Why would you go and add a bunch of aggressive seasonings to this that mask that natural beauty of the lobster, right? How do we know when we've reduced our deglazing liquid enough? We just immediately go to the next step, or is there an indication to know when that's ready for the next step? We haven't done this much yet. An indication. How do we know? What's the critical control point for knowing that our deglazing liquid has reduced enough? Fond is gone. Sure, that's good. I'm going to give you a good one. Red wine should be reduced down by 90% or au sec, nearly dry. White wine should be reduced by about 50 to 75%, right? And why do we reduce the wine? Good, and what was your reason? That's true. Concentrate the flavor, you got it, right? And we have achieved that. Now we're going to add our tomato paste. By adding a tomato paste to a mirepoix and cooking that tomato paste, what are we doing? What technique is that? Pinçage, yeah, and that is the function. It'll help give it some thickness a little bit, but more so, what are we doing this pinçage for? Yeah, to give and intensify that reddish color. That's what a lobster is, so we want our lobster bisque to reflect the color of the lobster shell. Tomato paste helps with that. What else? What other flavors and tastes does the tomato paste provide us with? Little sweetness, that's right. But isn't it true that we have to cook our pinçage down a little bit, right? Into a, how do we know when our pinçage is ready? Is there a visual that we can tell? Should it be bright red, black? Bright red? Well, that's what the tomato paste is, and it's not going to get any brighter in the pan. What's that? No. We've said it just once before, and that's okay. Sometimes repeating is necessary. A rusty, brownish color, right? Like a reddish tinge, but we want to develop that. That's going to be really hard to tell in this bisque because these shells are already red, right? So we're going to cook this down until we can smell that transformation. Another one of those things where chef instincts need to be intact. You have to be able to recognize what does raw tomato paste smell like and what does that cooked flavor taste like, right? It also helps remove, by cooking the pain-sage or the tomato paste in that pain-sage, a little bit of that tin metallic flavor and some of that harsh acidity that we can find by tomato paste or tomato products that are cooked down heavily. I like where we're at. I think we're going to add our rice, which is the classic and typical thickening agent for bisque. However, bisque gets its name. There's two ways that bisque gets its name. Some people say that it gets its name from the French word biscuit or biscuit, right? Which some say is the way that an old-style bisque was thickened with old biscuits, ground to like a floury paste. But really, biscuit means twice cooked, which is how old biscuits were cooked in France as well. Like a biscotti, have you ever had that? It's a baked once, sliced, and then baked again, right? So by twice cooking, what have we twice cooked in this whole procedure? Ah, there we go, nice and loud. What do we cook? Yeah, so roasting them, and now again during the sweating process, twice cooked. Now, do those things play into a job? I don't know, but it is cool to have, I think, a little bit of that spirit in history. I have yet, again, a nice, beautiful fond developed. Not too dark, though, just a little bit. We are going to deglaze yet again with lobster stock. How do we make our lobster stock? This entire process. If we were to add water instead of lobster stock to this, right, and simmer this for how long? 6 hours for a shellfish stock? 4 hours? Yeah, no more than one, right? Seafood and shellfish, 1 hour. We've actually used a lobster stock, right? We're using a lobster stock because we have it. And also, we're going to reinforce that lobster flavor, right? You can also use vegetable stock and fish stock. I wouldn't use only vegetable stock. I feel like that's going to probably take away from some of that lobster boldness. If anything, using a bit of fish stock will help at least give it a seafood character. Although vegetable stock is cheaper, so if at home or in a business you don't have a tremendous amount of lobster or fish stock on hand, well, but you do have lobster bones, use the bones and make a vegetable stock. It doesn't take much other than some mirepoix. It's looking pretty good right now. You notice that we have a tremendous amount of bones or shells in here relative to the amount of liquid that we have, right? It's a high ratio because we want a high ratio of flavor extracted. I'm going to set my wood spoon back in my sanitizer here and finish talking. When we make stock, do we know how much liquid we should have? How do we visually know when we've added enough water to our bones when we make a chicken stock, a beef stock, a fish stock? By how much? By a couple of feet? 2 inches, that's right. What happens if we cover it with too much more than that? Absolutely. More water, less bones, it's going to be a watery stock. What happens if we don't add enough? If the bones aren't covered, are they extracting any flavor? Not at all, right? They're not extracting any flavor at all. So what we have here is just enough liquid stock to cover these bones. That's going to increase the flavor of the soup, but it's also going to decrease the yield. We're going to have less soup. But if you ask me, I'd rather make something beautiful that's going to be something for somebody to remember and charge a little bit more than to charge a little bit less money and give them something that's okay. Like, well, the lobster bisque was only $8, but it wasn't all that good. I'd rather give you the best lobster bisque of your life for $14. Does that make sense? So it's important to be economical as a chef, but it's also important to be able to give quality, right? You don't want to serve people a bunch of scraps or serve somebody something that's inferior. So we're going to bring this to a boil and reduce to a simmer. And then what do we do anytime we make a stock or a broth once we bring to a boil and reduce to a simmer? We skim it, right? And what are we skimming? Impurities, fats that may raise to the surface. That's true, especially in fatty bones. This doesn't have too much fat in the shells. And what does that allow the stock to do when we skim those impurities? What's the benefit to the stock itself? More refined? Better quality. What about the clarity? Does it become more clear or less clear by skimming it? Yeah. And what would happen if we said, I don't feel like skimming it, and I don't care if it boils or not. I've got other stuff to do. All I need to do is cook it anyways. You're going to ruin the stock? What's going to happen to the stock if we just boil a beef stock or a lobster stock for the right amount of time, but at the wrong temperature and don't deglaze? What are some of the side effects of that decision? Sure, yeah. Cloudy, absolutely. Sure. And remember when we talked about beef stock, if we have a fatty stock that we're working with, that fat, if it boils, will emulsify it. The fat will break into smaller pieces and emulsify within the sauce, and you will have yourself a greasy stock. If we have a greasy stock, can we have a good soup made from that stock? Can we make a good sauce from a bad stock? So it all starts from that good stock, and if you don't care about the stock, it really doesn't matter if you care later on because the damage is already done. The impurities go into a clean container with a small ladle. We have a little bit now. What's the technique for removing those impurities? Just dig that ladle down, bring it to the side, right? Just skim that top surface, right? If you get a piece of carrot in there like you guys were asking yesterday when you were making your gumbo, okay, we lost one. But we're really trying to minimize that, right? And we're not trying to take off the lovely stock or the broth that we have underneath it, right? Now, like Jade said, a lot of chefs will pull off to the side. That'll allow the heat to apply itself indirectly and cause the impurities to drift to one side of the pan, which will make them easier to collect. However, it may run into somebody else's burner or the pot that they're trying to cook on that burner, and they may say, hey, put it back on the center. I need room to cook too. So you guys don't always have that luxury. One thing that refined chefs, technique of refinement at least, is to instead of continuously ladling this dépouillage or this scum and letting it sit and harden on the ladle and putting that same thing back into the stock, having our clean 9-pan or appropriately sized pan to rinse that ladle off in. I learned that at Bouchon while working for Thomas Keller. Diana has that book right now, don't you? Is it good? You like it? I'm telling you, the library that we have is a great resource. You should take advantage of it. All right, so at this point, this needs to simmer for about an hour, okay? I've taken the liberty of making a second lobster stock, at which point we're going to bring that in, and then we're going to finish our bisque that way, okay? So we can make that exchange now if you guys want to grab it. All right? We just have it sitting right in the kitchen there. If you guys would like to pass this around, you're welcome to give it a smell. I don't think it'd be smart to come up, but we can set that on the table and slide it around the back if you want to grab it, Diana. All right. Thank you, sir. How does it smell, guys? What's the first thing you smell? Good. Is that what we should smell? You're right. Now, getting back to our stock here, it's the same stock that we have there. This has just been cooked for 45 minutes longer. What was the point of adding that rice in the beginning anyways? It's not that much, right? Oh, yeah, the classic thickening agent for our bisque is actually rice. Now, although we're going to use roux in a few moments, right, because we've been using roux with mother sauces, I want to continue to impress that point instead of introducing a new skill. When we go and make your own, half of you are going to only use rice, and the other half will use roux, and we'll be able to compare the difference. Rice can be cooked, pureed in water, or if you have the expense to give, lobster stock, and then added back as a paste, just like this roux, into that and used as a slurry. Does that make sense? It's almost like cooked rice flour at that point. Half of us are going to do that, half of us won't. But you're right, that rice imparted a little bit of body into this, but also it has that its own distinct sort of Swedish flavor. We used arborio rice instead of a long-grain jasmine or basmati because remember when we made risotto and we stir that risotto, that starch releases and creates its own sauce? That's the perfect kind of rice to use for something like this. All right? So now we strain. One of the most important critical moments of the lobster stock is straining. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pass this through a chinois, and we have our sous chefs for the day. Come on up, don't be shy. Luis and Henry. All right, don't be shy, it's all right. We're going to pass this through a chinois, and while we're doing this, I'm going to continue on with the demonstration. We're not quite ready to eat food, but just to show sanitation practices, these fellas have washed their hands. We're also going to make sure that we take every precaution we can to keep our food safe, right? We're going to start with a chinois, and then we're going to show you something else after that. Why do we use a chinois and not a china cap? Why not? I can't find a chinois. I'm just going to use a china cap instead. It's yeah, the refinement of it and the finer texture. We don't want any impurities in our bisque, do we? Right? Here we go, fellas, just in case we need to clean. Now, these gentlemen have poured the bisque out, but that bisque has a lot more liquid to give, right? So, how much liquid do we have in there, Luis? Oh my goodness. Doesn't look too much, does it? So, we can actually strain that yet again into our pot here. We'll set this over there. Go ahead. We're going to pass it through the chinois yet again. Oh, okay. Because why not, right? If we're going to pass it, why not pass it through something that's going to sift it, right? How does that look? Nice deep color, body, aroma. Again, in a lot of fine dining places, I'll keep that here. A lot of fine dining places, they're never going to strain a sauce or a liquid without passing it. And when they say pass it, they mean through a strainer, because why not, right? If you're going to transfer it, tap, tap, tap. What happens if we push, push, push with a 2-ounce ladle? And that's exactly what we're not trying to do in the first place. If your chef, however, tells you to do that, and they are your chef, what do we say? Yes, chef, right? If you were my chef and you were suddenly my boss, if you said to do it, I would follow your lead. My choice is whether I want to work for you or not. But for that moment, my only option is to follow you, right? And we do want to work for people that know what they're doing, but we do need to show them the respect while they're our supervisor, right? And if you see that you're working for somewhere as you get better in school, man, I feel like all these habits that I'm learning in school, they're not doing in my job. Well, maybe it is time to find a new place. But it doesn't mean disrespecting your chef and disrespecting them to other cooks until you leave. It means if you want to make the choice to leave, then leave, to do so, right? Because when you become the chef, you'll probably realize that it's a little harder than perhaps you thought, right? Everybody has different ways as well, so you don't want to be stuck to this idea, well, in culinary school, this is how we did it. You have to also have an open mind to different techniques. And that's why understanding the why in the process becomes so important, because if a chef tells you what they're doing different, then you can ask yourself, well, why are they doing it, and how would that make that product better? And then you can decide for yourself. Like I said, although we've strained this bisque, there's still a lot more to give, and we need to milk this bisque. Yep, it's not just for cows anymore. We're going to bring out our hotel pan, or a wide base container, and we're actually going to transfer our shells, if we need to, the assistance of our sanitized red rubber spatula and or spoon, whatever's easiest. Don't want to use our hands because that looks caveman-like. Right? There we go. Good. Now this is called the wringing method, the milking method, and already as soon as we get this poured out, we'll kind of back away so you guys can see. These guys can see right now, do we have a lot more stock to give? Is that going to go into somebody's trash can? Is it going to go into ours? You know it's not. You can set that underneath into the bin. There we go. That's fine. Thank you, sir. Now, look at all this stock that we have here. You guys can stand up if you want. I really want you to see this. We've got to keep our shot clear, obviously, but look at all that liquid. Right? So now what's going to happen is Henry and Luis are going to work as a team to fold this cheesecloth over each end. Right? Rolling it, very good. And then we're going to grab each side of that, and at first we're just going to milk it up and down, and then the liquid inside of that broth is going to be forced to dispel through the cheesecloth and filter itself, and you're going to see just how much more lobster bisque there is to be had. So at first you don't have to crimp down, guys. You can just kind of, while it's loose like that and you still have some, right? See how the water is kind of drifting from side to side? Good. And then, after it's given its initial liquid, then we crimp down on it or twist. And then we really want to squeeze as much as we can. Some chefs will use a food processor and blend this. I don't like to do that just for clarity purposes. I feel like if we have the lobster shells crushed very finely and we roast them thoroughly, we crush them while we sweat them, we cook them for the right amount of time, and we wring them out, for me, that's okay. If you wanted, you could make a quick remoulage out of this by simmering it for another 20 minutes and using that as a light broth to then add back if it's strained. But for me, I don't like to do the hard grind. But some chefs will ask you to use a food processor. Some chefs will take a sausage grinder and put this mixture through it and grind that up. Other chefs will do that, and then they'll put that into a sausage stuffer and have a container at the nozzle where the sausage is supposed to come out and use the pressure from the sausage press to extract all that goodness. I think it's important to get every little bit, but I also think that you can remove a little bit too much of that mineral content in the shells. How are we doing, fellas? Pretty good, I agree. We'll get our container back for you when we're done. How much money do you think this would be if we chose to throw that away? That'd be a lot. I don't know if it's worth quite 60. You might be making some really, put some gold on it as a garnish, but we're definitely throwing away more than one portion. And if we said we're charging an estimated $14 for this soup, we want to get every portion that we can out of it, right? Let's say it's $14 and it's one soup. Maybe not such a big deal, right? But if we do this every single week or every 3 days, that adds up very quickly. Watch how much we have. More than you thought? So is it a useless step? Is it a step that requires effort and time? So what's going to happen, guys? The chef that says, oh man, I got to present my food on time, chef. I don't want to be late. I got to get everything done. That's all fine, but it's about learning the right habits too, right? Because if you have that mentality now, thank you very much, fellas, you did great. If you have that mentality now, it's going to be hard to break that habit later. And if some things are unimportant or, oh, that's not a big deal, well, when does it become a big deal, right? When do we start caring? When do we start paying attention to those issues? So next we're going to work on our thickening of this product, right? I'm going to use a wood spoon. I think if you're thorough and proper, you can actually get a good result. I'm actually going to add a little bit of our strained stock now to our roux. We've been using this technique for quite some time now. It's been working well, right? We almost make like tempering eggs, right? Take our roux. You can use a separate saucepan for this. It's gone a little cold. That's okay. We'll get it done. So right now I don't really like how long it's taking, but again, sometimes you just have to go through it, right? Saute pan would be more than fine, right? And as you can see, this has taken up more time than it should, right? To me, if I saw you guys doing this, I'd call it a mistake, right? I'd say get a saute pan or get a larger bowl and use it. Does this look efficient? Does it look like it's getting the job done properly and thoroughly? So we always have to be thinking, what's the best tool to do the best job, right? Now we have our paste built up. A little bit lighter. It's going to dissolve a little bit more evenly and readily now, right? Roux goes in, stirred very vigorously. Hot liquid, cold roux, right? What other options do we have? Yep. How long does roux take to thicken? Does it thicken immediately? Does it thicken like a cornstarch slurry like we used yesterday, Nancy? Immediately after adding it and heating it up, it looks perfect? No. It takes time. What is our ratio? I'm going to put this one in my video. What is the ratio for roux to thicken 1 quart of a stock? Or milk in the case of bechamel. How many ounces? I'll make it a little easier. How many ounces of roux? 3 ounces of roux per 1 quart. Good. Nice. I like that. Making me feel good. Can we put however much roux we feel like? You can, but it's probably not going to come out right. If you don't measure it, if you just add what you think is 3 ounces or what you think is 1 quart. Remember yesterday, Roman, we were like, how much is it? We're like, 1 quart. And they were like, all right, let's find out. And what was it, half? Right? It wasn't even half. And that's okay to make those approximations, but aren't we glad we did it? It would have ruined everything we did up to that point. So that is the ratio to achieve the consistency that we're looking for. And what consistency is that? What consistency, I'll ask again, do we need out of our sauces? What's that word that starts with the nappe, nap, yeah, both are suitable. Yeah. And what does nap mean? Right. And that one's kind of hard, right? Like a lot of sauces, even when they're too thin, will coat the back of a spoon, won't they? So what were some of the tricks that I taught you guys back in sauce week, last week, on how to tell if the sauce is too thick or too thin? What's one of them for too thick, Roman? Remember, I think it was our demi-glace was too thick. So what was that indication visually that I was saying it's very easy to tell if your demi-glace is too thick? No, that's a good try though. Color is one. The way it drops. So what will you see when it drops if it's too thick? Will it stream down? Will it stick to the spoon? Or come down in drops, thick drops? And the same problem if it's too thin, right? Coming down in liquid drops, right? It should pour, right? And when we pour that properly made sauce, should we then see where that sauce was poured, or should it disappear into a flat surface? Remember? Yeah, remember on when it was really thick, you could almost see where the stream was because it was so thick that it couldn't even itself back into that sauce. All right, guys, so we're going to bring this again to the boil, reduce to the simmer, and then we just have to finish. What are some of the things that we do when we finish food? Well, we check for salt, absolutely, right? It's very important to check for salt. Didn't we have that yesterday with the consomme, I believe? Right? And what was it? What was the issue? There's no salt, right? And then we tasted it, we recognized it immediately, but at that point it's on the bowl, and you might as well imagine that to be it's in the customer's hands, right? And we got it right, we adjusted it, right, and got salt in it, but that took time, right? What else are we trying to do when we finish foods? We've been doing it with our stocks, we've been doing it with our sauces. What type of ingredients go in at the end? Garnishes. What about before that, right? Just before the garnish. Sachet. And what is the sachet composed of? Yeah, some more fresh aromatics, our fresh top flavors. Let's say I added some of this cayenne pepper. Well, let's use the lemon juice as a better example. If we added this lemon juice now and cooked it for another 30 minutes, is that fresh lemon flavor going to persist? No, it's going to be long gone, right? So our fresh notes, right? How long do we cook a roux for? In a sauce? So let's say we've added, like we've just done, our roux into a liquid. And we know that we have to wait for it to thicken. We've just said that, to nappe. But how long does that typically take for a roux thickened product? Yeah, think back to our bechamel, think back to our espagnole, think back to the veloute. They all had the same amount of times to them, right? What time was that? 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, right? What a lot of young cooks can do is say, it's been 10 minutes and it's not thickening. I'm going to add more. And I bet that's how a lot of the sauces end up too thick, is that fear of the future and saying, this just doesn't look right. Something's wrong here. Guys, get some more roux going. We used a blonde roux for this. Why not a brown roux? Yeah, I agree. Too dark and more flavorful. Does a brown roux thicken more efficiently or less efficiently than a pale roux or a blonde roux? Yeah, the longer we cook that, the less it is able to thicken. A little bit less effective. Again, skimming at every step to clarify, same purposes as before. Reduce the heat just a little bit. There we go. Now the recipe that you guys have that I wrote for you guys, or transcribed for you guys, came from the CIA, or the Culinary Institute of America, where I went to school. And in that recipe, it says at this point to only cook the roux for 10 minutes, right? Now, if your chef gave you that recipe and said follow that, that's what you would do. The reason that I was just asking you that previous question was, well, why does the recipe say cook it for 10 minutes if we know that roux takes 35 minutes to cook down? Well, to be honest, I think that you should cook it a little bit longer to break down that starch and to allow it to thicken, but also to cook out that floury taste. Remember yesterday in the gumbos that we tried? I don't know if you guys got to try them early on, but that raw flour taste, even after simmering for 20 minutes, was still very present, right? So I think that it's very important, even in this bisque, to be able to cook that down. The reason that I believe that a chef who would want to cook that roux for a short amount of time would to not destroy the gentle flavors of our aromatics and to alter that lobster flavor too much. Does that make sense? We're going to kind of split the difference, okay? How do we finish a bisque? Well, we finish it with a few things. We finish it with salt, like everything else, to make sure that it's properly seasoned. Do we want our food to taste like salt? So why do we add it? To enhance the flavors already in the food? Sound good to you guys? Sounds good to me too. Are all foods salted to the same degree? That's true as well. Right? If you don't. It's always to taste, and the taste is subjective. But the question that I was saying is, do we want to have the same level of salt in a soup as we do a salad? Right, so it depends on the item, and that can come with experience too. But for me, I'm thinking always about salt to lift the flavor and no more. Never to make the food salty. But a lot of times with young cooks, we find that they under-season food. I think at home we use less salt than we do in the professional kitchen. We're going to add our cream, which is hot. Good. Cream is obviously going to add a tremendous amount of body to the soup. I'm going to cook that down. And a couple of things that affect the color of your bisque. If you'd like to have a darker bisque, start with a darker stock. By using the lobster stock, we will achieve a deeper color. Thomas Keller makes a lobster bisque that he calls a lobster cappuccino, because when you use this lobster stock to start the process, you actually get this rich cappuccino-like color, but boy, does it really taste like lobster. So for me, I'm not a big fan of the fish and water vegetable stock. A little bit maybe, but I really want it to taste as much like lobster as possible. Right? You guys are making this on Tuesday, so. A light nappe. I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear enough. We don't want to be as thick as a velouté. It's just going to be too heavy and too dense. We want it to have some elegance and some lightness to it. We don't want it to be clunky and thick. Any other questions? All right, so my last thing is, in terms of service, is remembering that the soup has to be served hot, doesn't it? Hotter than you think, doesn't it? What are the things that we need to consider when serving soup to our customers? Yeah. Yeah, it needs to remain hot while they're eating it, and before that, it needs to arrive hot as well, right? Should the soup be burning hot? Meaning, if I get the soup and I can't eat it for 7 minutes, but my dinner partner got a salad and they finished their salad before I can eat the first bite of my soup, that's a problem, right? So that soup needs to be served hot, but not burning hot, right? Do thick soups cool down more quickly or more slowly? That's right. The thicker the soup, the more slowly it cools down. 100% true. So this would fit right into the middle. Do our bowls need to be hot in advance? All right, so always making sure we have a warm bowl or two before we serve. That's the cue. Should that bowl be burning hot? Should it burn a server's hands? No, it should not, right? So, we are going to pass the soup, meaning we are going to strain it, which means we are going to use a clean chinois, right? I'm going to pass that through, removing impurities. Getting every little bit out. Thank you. Now, while this finishes, we're going to just talk about the plate up. Okay? Do we have to wear gloves when we handle ready-to-eat food? You're right. How do we know when to clean our gloves if they're used for a TCS food? Do we need to change them? So it doesn't just matter if you're wearing gloves. It matters if you're wearing clean gloves, right? But plate wipe here, which is just a clean towel, has been dipped in a little bit of water with a drop of vinegar, being pinched with a clean and sanitized clip here. I like to set those on these trays like we've seen before. Now, when it comes to garnishing soups, you want to choose a functional garnish. Yesterday we had a garnish. We had some thyme sprigs. Thyme sprigs aren't edible, so usually, most of the time you hear chefs say use a functional garnish, and that means a garnish that you can eat. A garnish that helps reinforce the flavors you already have in that food, or a garnish that helps to bring out the natural character or shows you what the soup is made of. So maybe you've had a broccoli soup before. Wouldn't it make sense in your broccoli soup to see broccoli florets? Would it make sense to make a pureed cream of broccoli soup and have asparagus garnish? No, you want to reinforce or indicate to the customer what they're eating. Fresh herbs are an option, but making sure that those herbs are always, always, always added at the end, right, because they lose their freshness. Croutons are always a nice one. Croutons are nice for textural contrast. They absorb flavors as well. And when we have this light-bodied soup, we have that nice crunch against it. Chives would be another good example of fresh herbs. Thyme would be okay perhaps for a hearty soup, but that is when we start to get into our robust herbs that like to be cooked for a long time, right? They're very pronounced, just like rosemary and sage, very hearty flavors, right? So we have our warm bowl. We won't let that get too cold before we serve. We'll turn off our heat. We have a nice clean ladle, right? Typically a portion of soup would be 6 to 8 ounces. If you're doing a tasting menu, you might have 4 ounces or so, a smaller amount than that. Should I hold this in midair and ladle it in? No. Sometimes you see young cooks doing that. I always wonder why. I always wonder what benefit it is that they think that they're achieving with that. There's really not one, right? By setting it down, and I'm going to take it off the stove to mimic taking it away from your stove, right? Never taking your plate to the pass, but bringing your food to the plating area or your prep station. Never putting a plate where the stove is. It's a very dangerous place, right? So then we ladle, right? Let the drip fall off the bottom. Pour. People like odd numbers, seem to be more striking, is a common thing you'll hear chefs say. So we're going to put, I think, 5 croutons. And I don't want to, we'll put 7, because I want to show you guys the strategy. Odd number 7, do we put them in a straight line? Do we make a smiley face? No, right? Sometimes natural, just letting them fall wherever they want to fall, right, is nice in and of itself. There is a time for lining things up, and there's also a time for letting things look more natural. Okay? In this case, I think that we'll have a nice natural appearance. So again, talking about some of those critical control points, making sure that you thoroughly roast your lobster shells, making sure that they're broken down very finely, making sure that your aromatics are cut very, very small so that they can extract their full flavor, making sure that we sweat those products without browning them so that we don't produce any off flavors, making sure that we deglaze and reduce that deglazing liquid so that that can concentrate the flavor and to cook out the alcohol. Making sure that we have a rich and flavorful stock that's going to allow us to really showcase the beauty of this soup, because it all starts with the stock. Making sure that that soup gets strained and wrung out to get every little bit of it. Making sure that when we serve our soup, our bowl is clean and hot and everything there is ready to go. And then making sure that the soup is a little bit hotter when it goes into the bowl, then you would want to eat it to account for the time that it's going to take to get to the customer. When we do our labs together, I want to make sure that you guys taste first. If I can't get to you immediately, well, at least you know exactly what it's like when it's at its ideal state. All right, so now we just got to make sure that we evaluate the finished product. And what we're looking for, again, is rich, flavorful soup, right? That is the full expression of the lobster, light-bodied, right? We don't have anything that is cloyingly thick, right? When I tasted it earlier, and I didn't mention this, I felt like it had enough brightness from the other aromatics. And the acidity, I don't feel like I need. I don't feel like there's any fattiness or richness from the cream. And for me, that's okay. I think that the lime juice is an optional to taste thing for me. I'm going to leave it out, especially in the wintertime. If I were to serve this in the summer or the spring when it's a little warmer, you might see me try to create a little bit of zestiness or a little bit more lightness. But being in December, I think a little heartier would be the way that I would prefer it. So that's going to finish it up. I appreciate you guys joining me, and I look forward to seeing you guys do this on Tuesday. I'm sure you're going to do well.